Hello. So, welcome back to another one of my amazing Ramble videos. This time, though, I didn't feel like setting up my VR stuff, so you're just gonna have to get my VTuber for now, so talk to the fox, alright? Anyway, I'm here to talk about a topic that I think I'm relatively qualified to talk about. Maybe not entirely still, because I have a lot to learn, but I'm here to talk about a YouTube short that I saw recently from a creator. I'll probably put them up on screen, along with a link to the short in the corner, probably, about a game called Cobb Can Move. His main point in the video itself was that he thought that jump scares were overrated, and to a certain degree, I agree. And in the short, he was talking about how important it is for a game to build atmospheric tension. And you know what? I totally agree with him. Atmosphere is probably one of the most core things to any horror experience. A lot of modern indie horror games tend to skip out on it because it's something that's incredibly difficult to build. But, and I'm going to draw a bit of an interesting comparison here, horror is actually structured a lot like comedy. See, in comedy, you'll have the setup, which is the lead up to the punchline, or the truly funny part of the joke. However, a joke with no setup just kind of falls flat. As a result of this, you need that setup in order to, well, build the momentum for the punchline, the funny part. And horror is much the same way. It's certainly a very interesting comparison, but as somebody who's been making horror games and consuming horror games for the better part of the past 6+ years, I think I have a pretty good understanding of how horror should be done correctly. What I am not saying here is jump scares equals bad. Never. Jump scares are not inherently bad. However, cheap jump scares are bad. Now, what necessarily makes a jump scare cheap? Well, it's skimping out on the atmosphere part. It's having jump scares with no setup. Something important for a horror game to do to make you feel truly scared is putting pressure on you, putting on stress onto you. As a matter of fact, this has been talked about by another furry YouTuber, Cheesy, before in his video about do horror games have to necessarily be scary? Because horror doesn't just mean scare, it also means horror. And what is horror but a little bit of stress? Essentially, intentionally stressing out the player, putting them actively on edge. That's where a lot of horror games tend to kind of fail, especially modern indie ones, is that they kind of skip the tension building part and jump straight to the jump scares, because they expect that will carry their fear factor throughout the entire game, when, as a matter of fact, none of the actually good indie horror games do this. If you want a prime example of a game that is really good at building its atmosphere and keeping it all the way through and using jump scares as a payoff, look no further than the original Five Nights at Freddy's. FNAF 1 is an expert in building its atmosphere, and not only that, but it's an expert of using its jump scares as a payoff to said atmosphere and to player mistakes. The game is very intentionally built in a way where the only time you get jump scared is directly because it's your fault. There are many a modern indie horror games that kind of miss this mark quite excessively, like Garten of Banban, which comes out swinging right away with the terrible jump scares. Listen, this isn't just gonna turn into a Garten of Banban hate fest, but that game is just so bad on so many levels. As a game developer myself, that's one of the interesting things in terms of perspective that I have to bring to the table, is that I myself have been trying to make horror games for quite a long time. But that's not an easy task, not at all. Especially since your number one goal in the beginning is building that atmosphere, so that you can then have those jump scares as payoffs, or even fail conditions. So, certainly, I agree that cheap jump scares are bad, but not all jump scares. Saying that jump scares in general are overrated is just incorrect. Again, returning to how horror is very analogous to comedy, just like how a joke doesn't work nearly as well without a punchline, it also doesn't work nearly as well without a setup either. Okay, so I literally just started editing this video right after I recorded it, and I realized that I misspoke here. What I meant to say is that, same as how jokes don't really work well when you have a punchline with no setup, The same could be said for the other way around. Jokes aren't really jokes without punchlines most of the time. Most of the time. There are exceptions, and certainly horror is different, so yeah, it really can work, but it's difficult. Yeah. So anyway, correction over. That doesn't mean it can't work. There are certainly plenty of purely atmospheric horror experiences, some that I've personally played myself and quite enjoyed. But it's a very fine line, and at that point it's more of an exploration game than it is truly a horror game to me. Well, I mean, it depends. Another game that I think is a great example of this build atmosphere first, jump scares later, is actually Alien Isolation. It's something that I've played on my Twitch channel quite a few times, and oh boy, is it one of the few games to make me just cower in a room for minutes on end because the xenomorph is just genuinely that unsettling. Because the atmosphere is perfect. It's perfect for making you feel so scared that you just want to sit in a room and not confront the xenomorph at all. But at the same time, the game would not be the same without those jump scare payoffs that you get when you make mistakes and get in the xenomorph's way. Same goes for another game that's made me cower in a room for minutes on end, At Dead of Night. That game wouldn't be nearly as good without the occasional random sightings of Jimmy, and the fact that you can just hear him ambiently walking around and yelling your name. I mean, surely it helps that he's a real person, considering the fact that At Dead of Night is an FMV game, but my point still stands that part of the reason why At Dead of Night works so much is because of the atmosphere it builds. You are in a place where you are inherently unsafe. You are dealing with the owner of the hotel that you are actively staying at. In all likelihood, you are going to die. Or, well, not die, but you'll get knocked out and end up in one of the storerooms. In general, horror, even ones that have jump scares, just doesn't work without the atmosphere first. And that's a problem that a lot of modern indie horror titles tend to run into. They focus on the jump scares without taking the time to build a proper atmosphere first. Now, certainly, as I've mentioned, there are some games in recent memory that are really good at this. Another, maybe other, slightly different example being a game like Kanito Pet. Honestly, I think Kanito Pet with its scares is just really well done. Some people might disagree, but to be honest, they're wrong. Sure, the sounds are a tiny bit loud, that's probably one valid complaint, but in general I think the game does a pretty good effort at making the atmosphere good before it attempts to pull off any sort of jump scares. In general, I think it's kind of a foolish thing to just 100% condemn jump scares, because while they certainly can be cheap when used improperly, when used properly, oh boy, are they great. Think of it more like the cherry on top of a nice, boiling, edge-of-your-seat feeling. Shouldn't be the main course. No, that should never be how it is. But it's great to have to help increase the fear factor. Anyway, I think that's enough rambling for me for now. I've already been going for 10 minutes, and that's fine. That's a mighty fine length. I'm probably going to start doing more of these VTuber Ramble videos because, setting up my VR stuff takes a good hot minute that I sometimes just frankly don't want to do. So I think I'll start making more of these little just silly videos that are hastily recorded and somewhat hastily edited. I mean, these are my unscripted ramble videos after all, not my main course stuff. Which, I hope to be making more in-depth stuff soon as I can get over my writer's block. After I do though, I can ensure that we'll be getting more high-quality videos, whether that be more Reddit videos, or I've even been considering doing, like, creepypasta readings or something, if you guys would be up for that. Anyways, regardless, I stream Wednesdays and Fridays on twitch.tv/GenieCMD, or as a semi-recent development on this very YouTube channel, so make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on that, and also so I don't fall into obscurity forever. Anyways, thank you for watching. I hope you had fun, and I hope you go be slightly more informed about how good horror works. Of course, kind of in my opinion, but also it's just a common pattern that I see for how you should do good horror, so, you know, whatever. So, I will see you later. Bye!